A Navy SEAL came home on leave, expecting to see his Marine veteran brother. Instead, he was told his brother had gone to a healing retreat and had abandoned his loyal German shepherd, Scout. But then the SEAL found Scout's collar in the trash. His brother wasn't at a retreat. He was hiding under a storm-soaked pier, freezing and starving, while his dog stood guard, refusing to leave. When loyalty is all you have left, it becomes a miracle. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. Rain fell over Seattle, like silver threads stitching the sky to the pavement, soft and relentless, turning every streetlight into a blurred halo and every rooftop into a slick sheet of black glass. The smell of salt from Elliott Bay mixed with the damp scent of cedar and asphalt, a uniquely Pacific Northwest perfume. Ethan Carter stepped out of the airport into the drizzle with a silent, controlled breath. At 34, he moved with the caution of a man who never entered a new space without mapping exits, threat points, and escape routes. His build was that of a Navy SEAL forged by hostile oceans and steel hulls, lean muscle, thick shoulders, scars like faded constellations across his arms. His jaw was angular, dusted in dark stubble, his hair clipped short in a regulation cut that framed storm-gray eyes. Those eyes were sharp, always scanning, but beneath their surface lay a quiet ache, 15 years of witnessing things that never completely washed off. He adjusted the strap of his duffel bag, and his fingers brushed against the object inside that mattered more than anything else in the bag. A black tactical dog leash, heavy nylon with a reinforced steel clasp. A gift for Scout. The dog always understood him in ways people couldn't. Ethan slid into a taxi without waiting for the line. "North Capitol Hill," he said, 18th Avenue East. His voice was calm, flat, decisive. The driver, a man in his late 50s with weathered skin and a Seattle Seahawks cap pulled low, nodded and pulled away from the curb. Ethan's mind replayed the last phone call that felt wrong. Liam's voice, thin, tired, stretched around pain he tried to hide. Liam Carter was his younger brother, 2 years down the line, once a powerful U.S. Marine, broad chest, sun-bleached hair, laugh like gravel and sunshine. But war had wrung something out of him. PTSD didn't just haunt him, it hollowed him. Panic attacks, sudden silences, waking up gasping at 3 a.m. Scout, Liam's black German shepherd, had been the only steady thing left. Scout was massive, almost wolf-like, with a coat like polished obsidian and amber eyes that held uncanny intelligence. He was trained, vigilant, and fiercely loyal. If darkness came too close, Scout stood between it and Liam. The taxi rolled into their childhood neighborhood. Houses sagged from age but were still alive with the memories of scraped knees and summer hose water, except one. Their house stood in the drizzle looking strangely sanitized, neat, unnatural. A black BMW SUV sat in the driveway, shiny, expensive, and smug. The rose bushes their mother planted, gone, replaced with sterile landscaping gravel, cold and gray. Ethan's pulse tightened. He stepped out into the mist, gravel crunching beneath his boots like bones. He walked to the front door and rang the bell, jaw clenched, body still. The door opened to Karen Carter, Marcus's wife. She was tall, with a sharp, angular face and a blonde ponytail, pulled so tight it looked painful. She wore expensive athleisure-like armor, white and gray, spotless. Her eyes were pale blue, cold, calculating, impatient. Karen always carried herself as if everything beneath her wasn't worthy. People, places, emotions. "Ethan," she said, voice thin, "we weren't expecting you." Ethan didn't answer. He pushed past her. The house no longer smelled like lemon and old books. It smelled like synthetic lemon cleaner and emptiness. Marcus Carter appeared from the hallway, 40, soft around the middle, hair styled to perfection, beard trimmed to look effortless. He held a tablet like a lifeline. Marcus knew money, not people. He liked control, ownership, and image. "Ethan, welcome back. You should have called," he said, spreading his arms as if expecting a hug. Ethan's gaze sliced through the performance. "Where's Liam?" Silence. A tiny crack of panic flashed in Marcus's eyes. Karen spoke first, arms crossing defensively. "He left, for a therapy retreat. In the mountains." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "And Scout?" "He surrendered the dog," Karen said, lifting her chin. "He didn't need it anymore." Ethan's pulse stopped. Liam would never abandon Scout, not on his worst day. Marcus jumped in quickly, laughing too loudly. She means Scout went with him. He just couldn't keep the dog inside the main facility, so kennels, you know. The contradiction was sloppy. Ethan didn't speak. He walked down the hallway. Liam's door used to have a "Keep Out" sign. Now it was smooth white, lifeless. Ethan opened it. Mirrors reflected him back, cold, sterile, empty. A full home gym. Liam's bed, desk, books, the worn chair where he sat with Scout, gone, not moved, erased. Ethan felt pressure behind his ribs, not anger yet, something colder. He walked out the back door into the rain. 3 trash bins sat neatly beside the house. He lifted the lid of the first, food waste. Second, cardboard boxes. Third, yard waste. On top of the cut rose branches sat a black trash bag. Something caught in the knot, scratched brown leather. Ethan pulled it free. Scout's old collar, worn, the brass name tag dulled from years of Liam's thumb rubbing it during panic attacks. Scout. Ethan closed his fist around the collar until the leather bit into his palm. That's when the violence went quiet inside him. Not rage, resolve. Someone had removed Liam piece by piece from the house, like deleting a file. Ethan slipped the collar into his jacket, turned toward the house, and spoke to no one and to the rain itself. "I'm coming, little brother." And the rain didn't whisper anymore. It applauded. Seattle's night pressed down like a wet wool blanket as Ethan Carter stepped back into the rain, the old leather collar in his jacket feeling heavier than any weapon he'd carried overseas. The city lights bled into the soaked pavement, blurring blues and yellows into streaks as though the world was trying to warn him that truth rarely comes clean. He moved fast, driven not by panic, but by the absolute clarity of a mission. Find Liam alive. He sat in his rental Jeep, fingers flying over his phone screen, pulling up every PTSD retreat within a 6-hour radius. His voice turned hoarse after call number 20. "Do you have a patient named Liam Carter? Tall, Marine veteran, might have a service dog?" The answers were always the same. Cold, polite refusals drowned in bureaucracy. No Liam, no no record. By the 12th call, his voice rasped, but he didn't stop. He had endured ocean storms clinging to a helo ladder. Phone calls were nothing. The sky darkened until clouds swallowed the last trace of day. The rain intensified, tapping on the windshield like restless fingers. Ethan leaned his forehead briefly against the wheel, inhaling slow to control the tightness rising in his chest. His training hammered into him, that emotion fogged judgment. But emotion, specifically love, was the engine driving him now. Ethan started anew, shifting strategy. If Liam hadn't gone to a retreat, then someone local must have seen him. Homeless shelters, outreach centers, veteran drop-in clinics. He drove toward Pioneer Square, the windshield smeared by fat raindrops, wipers struggling to keep up. Pioneer Square at night was a patchwork of brick buildings and wet sidewalks, glimmering with neon reflections. Under the decorative trees wrapped in cold white lights, shapes huddled in blankets and soaked jackets. Ethan parked and approached the St. Bridget Outreach Shelter, a narrow brick building with peeling sage green paint around the doorframe. Inside, the lights were warm but tired. The air smelled of soup, wet wool, and something like exhaustion softened by human kindness. Behind a serving table stood Sarah Delgado, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair braided neatly down her back. Her round face held the kind of soft strength that comes from surviving grief instead of running from it. Deep crow's feet framed her eyes, not from age but from decades of choosing to smile, even when life gave no reason. Her sweater was hand-knitted, navy blue, and worn at the elbows. On her apron was a patch embroidered with tiny white wings. She looked up, studied Ethan's face without flinching. Not many people could hold a Navy SEAL's stare without wavering. She did. "You're not here for a meal?" she said gently. Ethan shook his head and pulled out a photo. Him, Liam, and Scout in happier days. "Have you seen him? Or the dog?" Sarah wiped her hands on a towel, eyes narrowing with memory. "Yes," she said finally, voice dropping to a murmur, meant for sacred truths. 3 weeks ago, it was raining like this. Ethan's pulse leaped. "He tried to come in. He stayed outside." Sarah's expression became distant, remembering. He was trembling, soaked through, shivering, but he held himself stiff as if he'd crumble if he sat down. The dog. Her lips softened around the memory of Scout. Huge, jet black, smart eyes. That dog stood in front of him like a wall. Wouldn't let anyone close. Ethan swallowed. That was Scout. Silent, immovable, loyal. Why didn't they come inside? He didn't have the right paperwork to bring the dog in, Sarah said, bitterness threading her voice. Rules can be cruel to the people who need mercy the most. She gestured to the alley outside. He waited under the awning, didn't touch the soup I brought him. The dog pushed the bowl back with his nose. Ethan felt something hollow inside his ribs twist. Did they leave together? Yes, shoulders touching, like one carried the other. She pointed toward the waterfront. Footprints went that way, toward the pier. Ethan thanked her and turned to leave, but Sarah reached out and lightly touched his sleeve. Her hand was warm despite the cold night. Whoever that man was, she said softly, he hasn't given up. That dog won't let him. Ethan nodded, throat tight. Neither will I. He headed toward the waterfront on foot. Rain ran down the back of his neck, soaking into his collar, chilling him to the bone. The city thinned near the pier, less neon, more concrete and shadows. He followed the trail. Muddy footprints that became smeared impressions, then only intuition. He stopped beneath the overpass where steel beams groaned with the weight of the highway above. The space smelled of salt, old rope, and cold rot. Puddles reflected the sickly yellow streetlights. A shape moved under the overhang to his left. A man stood leaning against a stack of soggy cardboard boxes, lighting a cigarette. He was in his mid-40s, tall but slightly hunched from a life of always bracing for winter. His beard was short, peppered with gray, his eyes sharp as if they had learned to expect the worst. A faded army jacket hung loosely over him, too big for his frame. This was Tom Reyes, a veteran whose years on deployment had built discipline, but whose return to civilian life had broken everything else. The tremor in his hand was subtle, a mix of cold and memory. Ethan approached, slow but confident. "Excuse me," he said, voice level. "I'm looking for someone." Tom's eyes flicked to Ethan's boots first, military boots, then to his posture. "Not a cop," he muttered, smoke curling between them. "You move like someone who has been trained to disappear in the dark." "Navy?" Ethan confirmed. Tom nodded. "Army. Before life got complicated." Ethan held out the photo. Tom studied it with a squint. His brows furrowed. "Yeah," he said finally. "Saw him. Couple nights ago. Wasn't doing good. Feverish. Could barely walk." Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. Was the dog with him? Never left his side. That dog kept nudging him, like trying to keep him awake. Tom gestured toward the wooden pier, where the ocean murmured beneath rain-soaked planks. "You see that ramp? Leads to the old maintenance dock. Folks don't go there. Too cold. Too exposed. But if someone wants to hide," he shrugged, "that's where I'd go." Ethan felt the world sharpen into a single point. Target acquired. He nodded once to Tom in silent gratitude and moved away. Rain slapped the back of his neck. The wind smelled like algae and rust. He walked the length of the pier, boots thudding. Each step was a prayer. At the far end, where the dock met the shadows beneath the bridge, he saw it. A shape barely big enough to be called shelter. A patchwork of pallets, torn tarp, cardboard softened by rain. A den for someone who had nowhere left to go. And prints, large paw prints, circling the entrance. Ethan's chest tightened, the collar in his pocket pressed into him like a heartbeat. He crouched, stared into the darkness, and whispered into the rain, "Liam, I'm here." The storm hammered the maintenance dock with sheets of icy ocean spray as Ethan Carter crouched low, heartbeat syncing with the roar of waves smashing the pilings beneath him. The salt wind cut through his clothes, turning the fabric into a cold second skin. He shifted toward the makeshift shelter tucked beneath the pier, a pathetic structure of sagging pallet walls, soggy cardboard, and shredded blue tarp. The smell of mold and seawater hung thick in the air, mixing with rust, diesel, and the faint, sour scent of sickness. Ethan flicked his flashlight downward, careful not to blind whatever was inside. Something moved, fluid, silent, predatory. Scout emerged from the shadows like a fragment of night torn loose. A massive German shepherd with a sleek black coat matted by rain and grime. He had lost weight. His ribs pressed against his fur like a cage, salt crusted on his ears. His amber eyes, usually warm and watchful, were now feral green in the beam of the flashlight, burning with protective desperation. The dog growled, deep and resonant, the kind of warning that came from instinct older than language. Ethan slowly lowered to a crouch. "Scout," he said, voice steady, "it's me." Scout's growl lifted, but did not fade. His lips curled, Not in aggression, but in warning. Don't take him. Ethan turned the flashlight toward his own face, rain streaking down his skin, jaw tight with urgency. Where's Liam? The dog hesitated. A high whine slipped out. Pain, confusion, loyalty torn between fear and hope. Scout looked back toward the shelter, then shoved his body against Ethan's knee, leaving a streak of cold, wet fur on Ethan's pants before darting back into the cramped shelter. That was all Ethan needed. He dropped to one knee and pushed the warped pallet aside, revealing the collapsed figure inside. Liam lay curled tightly on himself, arms wrapped around his ribs as though holding his body together by force. His face was gaunt, cheekbones jutting sharply, lips nearly purple. His blonde hair, once sunlit and bright, was dirty and damp, plastered to his forehead. His breathing came in ragged, uneven pulls. Every inhale was a struggle, his skin had a gray pallor beneath the feverish flush. Liam Carter, the Marine who could carry a man on his shoulders through sandstorms, was now barely conscious beneath a scrap of wet blanket. Ethan forced himself not to panic. Panic wasted time. "Liam," he said, voice shaking despite discipline. "Can you hear me?" Liam's eyelids fluttered, barely opening. A whisper leaked from cracked lips. On? His voice sounded scraped raw, like rusted metal tearing. Ethan slid one hand beneath his brother's back and felt the chill that went deeper than skin. Cold soaked into bone, hypothermia. "Hey," Ethan whispered, voice breaking. "You're okay. I've got you." Scout pressed into the tiny space beside them, nudging Liam's hand with his nose, whimpering when Liam didn't respond fully. Ethan pulled his thick jacket off, ignoring the sting of cold air against his skin. He wrapped it tight around Liam's shaking form, tucking fabric around his neck and legs, trapping what little heat remained. When he tried to lift Liam, Scout surged forward with a short growl, not threatening, but terrified, eyes wide. Ethan placed his palm on Scout's wet head. "I'm not taking him from you," he murmured. "We're doing this together." The dog's trembling eased. Ethan slid his arms beneath Liam, too light, frighteningly light, and lifted. Liam's head slumped against Ethan's shoulder. Scout pressed into Ethan's left leg, matching his steps like a trained rescue swimmer, pushing through surf. They climbed the slick dock, waves exploding beneath them. Ethan shielded Liam's body from the wind. Scout leaned into Ethan's hip with all his remaining strength, like ballast keeping them upright. By the time Ethan reached the Jeep, he could no longer feel his fingers. He laid Liam across the back seat and opened the passenger door for Scout. The dog hesitated, instinct pulling him back toward the den where he had spent days holding his vigil. Ethan nodded once, giving the permission Scout needed. The dog jumped in, lying with his head on Liam's legs, eyes fixed on him like a living heartbeat monitor. Ethan drove fast, too fast. Tires tore through pooled water as slick streets streaked past in a blur of stoplights and drowning neon signs. "Stay awake, Liam," Ethan urged, glancing at the rearview mirror. Liam's eyes fluttered open and closed, as if consciousness was a tide pulling him out. "Don't leave, Scout," Liam rasped. "Never," Ethan choked. "Neither of you." The VA emergency department doors burst open as Ethan carried Liam inside, jacket still wrapped around him. Scout followed at his heel, soaked fur plastering to his ribs. The fluorescent lights sharpened every edge of the hospital, the sterile floors, the cold metal rails, the distant clatter of carts. A nurse at the front desk, Dr. R.S. Jung, early 30s, sharp features softened by tired compassion, looked up. She had sleek black hair tied into a messy bun, crescent-shaped shadows under her eyes from too many night shifts, and a small scar near her chin, hinting that her life had not always been clean hallways and checklists. Her voice was firm, despite exhaustion. "Sir, the dog—" Ethan cut her off. "He stays. He's a service dog." Scout planted himself beside the gurney and lowered his head onto Liam's leg, unmoving. Dr. Jung assessed the dog's posture, calm but vigilant, and made a split-second decision. "Fine. Don't let him interfere." Medical staff rushed in, needles, wires, warm IV bags. Ethan stood aside only when forced. Scout watched every hand that approached Liam, muscles taut, eyes blazing with warning but holding. Time blurred into a haze of metallic beeps and hushed medical terms: hypothermia, sepsis risk, dehydration, pneumonia suspicion. When it was over, Liam was stabilized, tucked beneath heated blankets in a dim ICU room. Scout crawled beneath the bed, head resting just against Liam's hand. eyes fixed on him, refusing sleep. Ethan sat nearby, rainwater still dripping from his clothes, body stiff with exhaustion, but refusing to leave. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself to exhale. He reached down and placed his hand on Scout's back. The dog leaned into the touch heavily, and Ethan realized Scout had stayed awake for days, keeping his brother alive with only instinct and love. Ethan whispered into the quiet room, "You saved him." Scout closed his eyes, finally letting his body rest. Ethan looked at Liam, pale, fragile, breathing, but alive. That was all that mattered. He leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to plan for war, because whoever made Liam disappear had just lost the first battle. Ethan stood beside Liam's hospital bed, long after the machinery settled into a slow, stable rhythm. The monitors glowed faintly through the dim ICU room, blinking in calm intervals, and Scout, curled beneath the bed like a dark guardian, slept with one ear always alert, twitching at every footstep in the hallway. Ethan felt the exhaustion tugging at him, but beneath his fatigue was something sharper, colder, more controlled than rage. A Navy SEAL didn't wage war with impulse. He waged it with precision. He slipped into the hallway, careful not to wake Liam or Scout. The corridor was washed in sterile pale blue light, the scent of antiseptic mixing with the faint odor of brewed coffee from a break room down the hall. Ethan pressed his phone to his ear and called the one person who would understand the battlefield of paperwork as well as any war zone. Navy JAG office, Lieutenant Commander Ava Rostova, a clipped female voice answered. Ava Rostova had a voice like frosted steel, sharp and controlled, but her accent carried the faintest trace of Russian vowels, precise and unforgiving. She was a woman in her late 30s with an angular face and ice-blue eyes that surveyed every room as if she were mapping exits and liabilities. When people first met her, they noticed her posture, rigid, military, no wasted motion. Her dark brown hair was braided tightly, a habit she'd picked up from years of martial arts training. Her reputation, relentless in litigation, feared in negotiation, the Navy's quiet legend in a fitted suit. Ethan had met her once during a debriefing in Coronado. He knew 3 things about her. She didn't waste words, she didn't tolerate incompetence, and she won. "Ma'am," Ethan said, voice low, "it's Carter. I need legal guidance. Urgent. It involves my brother, Liam Carter, U.S. Marine veteran. Fraud, exploitation, neglect." He heard brief silence, not hesitation, calculation. "You have 30 seconds, she replied. Ethan summarized everything. Marcus forging fiduciary control, benefits redirected, Liam abandoned without resources, forced into homelessness. There was no tremble in Ethan's voice. The discipline of special operations echoed through every syllable. When he finished, Ava didn't express sympathy, just strategy. "Text me the documentation. I'll initiate contact with the VA Office of Inspector General and the U.S. Attorney's Office. Do not speak to the perpetrator directly. Do not warn him. We weaponize silence." Ethan exhaled, tension slipping away enough for him to feel the ache in his shoulders. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me," Ava said, voice like an ice pick. "Make sure your brother lives long enough to testify." She hung up. No comfort, no promises, just orders. It felt like home. Over the next days, Ethan divided time between Liam's bedside and his meticulous hunt for proof. Scout's eyes tracked Ethan whenever he moved, as if afraid that Ethan too might vanish if he blinked. The dog had begun recovering. Hospital staff slipped him strips of turkey during shift changes, and though he accepted the food, his focus stayed on Liam, pressing his nose against Liam's hand whenever the Marine stirred. Liam's improvement was slow. His fever receded, his color returned, and he began speaking more than one-word murmurings. The first full sentence he whispered, voice rough, was, "Did Scout stay the whole time?" Ethan answered simply, "Never left." Liam's eyes filled, but no tears fell. Marines didn't cry. They leaked dignity in silence. On the 4th morning, Ethan met an investigator in the hospital's administrative wing, Michael Harris, a VA OIG agent. He was in his mid-50s, beard peppered with gray, glasses slipping down his nose, and a worn tweed blazer that made him look more professor than federal agent. But his eyes, the steady, quiet kind, had seen things. He shook Ethan's hand firmly and said, "Show me everything." They went through Liam's records, bank transfers, signed power of attorney, Liam's medical chart noting 8 weeks of missed appointments, every piece stacked into a damning structure of intent. Harris's face didn't change until he saw the transfer history, tens of thousands siphoned over months. And then he whispered, "This wasn't negligence. This was extraction." Harris documented Ethan's testimony, then approached Liam's bedside. Liam looked small beneath the blanket, his proud shoulders now too thin, eyes softer than Ethan remembered. Scout lifted his head and pressed closer, muscles tensed. Harris lifted both hands in peace. "I'm here to help him," he said. He asked Liam questions. Did Marcus explain the document? Did he promise he'd secure benefits? Did he threaten anything? Liam's voice was barely audible, but his honesty was steady. When Harris left, Ethan followed him into the hallway. "Is it enough?" Ethan asked. "More than enough," Harris replied. "Your brother won't have to fight again. Not this war." True to her promise, Ava Rostova moved with the fury of a legal missile strike. Within 48 hours, she had filed federal complaints for fraudulent fiduciary control, theft of government funds, veteran neglect, endangerment. She never raised her voice. She never cursed. She dismantled Marcus with paperwork and precedents. The federal subpoena arrived at Marcus's front door without drama. No sirens, just 2 agents and a folder. Karen opened the door wearing designer athletic wear, pale hair pulled into a perfect ponytail, face frozen in irritation that strangers had interrupted her curated suburban afternoon. She was tall, thin, manicured into sharpness, her voice the brittle glass sound of someone who had never been told no. When she learned she was implicated, her dismissive tone cracked. Under pressure, Karen folded. She surrendered passwords, documents, and bank statements, trying to distance herself from Marcus. Marcus was arrested without spectacle while putting golf clubs into the back of his Lexus SUV. His face, once smug in superiority, collapsed as Harris recited the charges. Weeks passed. Liam regained weight, color, and steadiness. Scout gained back muscle. Ethan stayed every day until Liam could walk without the IV pole. When the restitution came through, Ethan helped sign acquisition paperwork for a new rental, a small house with a yard near the water. VA back pay restored, benefits reinstated, Marcus sentenced to federal time. At the final discharge appointment, a nurse handed Scout a bright red rubber ball. The dog perked immediately. Liam laughed, a sound Ethan hadn't heard in years, raspy and soft. "King deserves a crown," the nurse teased. Scout took the ball and strutted like royalty. Ethan watched his brother watch the dog, watched hope return to both faces, and felt something settle in his chest. Liam wasn't fully healed, trauma never really ended, but Ethan had brought him home, and this time, no one would erase him. Summer poured itself over Tacoma in a syrup of warmth and gold, as if the world were finally willing to give back what winter had stolen. The small, pale blue house sat on a quiet residential street, where maples threw long shadows over the sidewalk and neighbors waved from porches with sprinkler hoses in their hands. The air smelled of cut grass and seatbelt drifting from the harbor. Ethan Carter leaned his shoulder against the wooden frame of the porch and took in the yard. His yard now, a modest rectangle of green bordered by hydrangeas that Liam had planted 3 weeks ago. Scout chased a red rubber ball in looping figure-8 patterns, his black coat glossy like obsidian under the light. When the dog skidded to a stop, paws tearing small furrows in the damp grass, he glanced back toward Ethan with an expression that could only be described as dignified irritation, as though judging whether Ethan was going to fake another throw. Ethan smirked. Even after everything, Scout had become the comedic relief in a house that had once felt carved from tension. Behind Ethan, the screen door squeaked softly. Liam stepped out, balancing a mug of coffee between hands that steadied more every week. He had gained weight back, slowly, muscle returning beneath skin that no longer looked brittle. His blonde hair was trimmed neatly at the sides, though a stubborn lock fell over his brow, refusing to obey. His face, once ghostly pale under the fluorescent lights of the ICU, now held sun-kissed color. There were lines on his face, remnants of sleepless years, but they no longer looked like fractures. They looked lived. "You watching the king?" Liam asked, nodding toward Scout, who now stood proudly with the ball clenched between his jaws. Ethan turned, and the corners of his mouth lifted. He earned the crown. Scout trotted over and dropped the ball at Liam's feet, staring up with unbroken focus, tail thumping. Liam crouched, rubbing Scout's ears. "You ready?" Scout's muscles coiled. Liam threw the ball, and Scout launched like an arrow. Liam stood again, wincing slightly at a tight spot in his side. Ethan noticed the wince, the lingering aftermath of weeks of malnutrition, but said nothing. He'd learned something. Silence, when shared between people who had survived things together, was its own language. In the following weeks, life unfolded in small rituals. Liam attended therapy 3 times a week at the VA Tacoma Clinic. His therapist, Dr. Maren Hope, was a woman in her early 50s with loosely curled gray hair that she pinned in a careless bun. She was medium height, soft in build, rounded in the way of someone who cared more about comfort than appearances. Her skin was olive-toned, her eyes the color of river stones, kind but unflinching. She specialized in somatic trauma therapy, and her voice had a way of slowing the storm inside a person. Liam had never met someone who could sit through a flashback without fear or pity, Doctor. Maren simply breathed evenly and said, "Your body thinks the danger is happening now. Let's show it that you're here instead." Scout always lay on the floor during sessions, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. "Breathe like him," she would tell Liam. And Liam would. For the first time in years, someone didn't treat his trauma as a problem to be hidden. They treated it as a wound that deserved tending. Meanwhile, Ethan began classes at Tacoma Community College. Returning to a classroom after battlefields felt strange, tables too clean, pencils too sharp. But he needed to understand the mechanisms of healing the same way he once learned the mechanics of breaching a door. He sat in the front row, filling notebooks with meticulous handwriting. His professor, Dr. Jonah Beck, was a tall, broad man in his late 40s with a bushy mustache and rolled-up sleeves, like a carpenter who stumbled into academia by accident. He was booming and enthusiastic, prone to slapping his palm on desktops to emphasize theories of trauma and neuroplasticity. Ethan found himself absorbing every word. "Trauma isn't weakness," Dr. Beck said on the first day. "It's a scar on the mind. Healing isn't going back. It's building forward." Ethan underlined the sentence 3 times. When Dr. Beck asked why Ethan was studying trauma psychology, Ethan looked him in the eye and said, "Because I refuse to let good people drown quietly." Dr. Beck didn't ask anything further. Some truths didn't need excavation. Afternoons were reserved for the porch. Ethan studied. Liam sketched in a worn notebook, images of Scout sleeping or trees casting shadows over the grass. Scout turned these sessions into silent auditions for best actor in a dramatic role. He would sigh heavily, drape himself across both of their boots at once, or flop on his back in the grass with all 4 paws in the air. Once, Ethan faked a throw. Scout froze, ears back, eyes wide, betrayed so deeply that Liam started laughing. A loud, full laugh that burst out before he could stop it. The laugh startled a flock of starlings from the maple branches. Liam immediately clapped a hand over his mouth, as if the sound was too big for the world. Ethan blinked. He hadn't heard Liam laugh like that in 10 years. "Don't look at me," Liam muttered. "Too late. I hate you." "No, you don't." Scout placed the ball at Ethan's feet with an expression that could only mean, "Grow up." Humor became oxygen. Healing crept in through repetition. Days passed. The house gathered signs of life. A pair of muddy boots by the door, a half-built birdhouse on the porch rail, 3 mugs that never quite made it to the dishwasher. One Saturday morning, Ethan pulled a sealed envelope from the mailbox. It was from Jag. Marcus had officially signed the final restitution transfer. Case closed. Ethan read the letter twice, the weight of it settling under his sternum. No courtroom battle. No eruption. Just paperwork, signatures, and consequences. A war fought with ink instead of fists. Scout nudged Ethan's leg and dropped the red ball. Ethan crouched and rubbed the dog's jaw. "You did good, buddy." Scout leaned against him with the full warmth of his body. A reward and a reminder. Strength doesn't always roar. That night, the 3 of them sat on the porch. The sky melted from orange to violet. The air cooled. Liam leaned back in the chair, Scout curled at his feet, Ethan sipping iced tea, pretending not to notice how Liam's shoulders relaxed for the first time in years. "You think healing ever finishes?" Liam asked. Ethan considered. "No," he answered truthfully, "but you get stronger than what broke you." Scout nudged Liam's wrist, guiding his hand to rest on warm fur. Liam exhaled slowly. For once, it wasn't a tremble, it was release. In the end, this story reminds us that miracles are not always thunder or parted seas. Sometimes God works quietly through the small and steady things. A brother who refuses to give up, a dog who never abandons his post, a simple home where healing slowly blooms. In our ordinary days, when we feel lost or unseen, God may send help, not with a trumpet blast, but through the loyalty of someone who stays, through a hand that reaches down, through a heart that refuses to walk away. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need reminding that loyalty can be holy, that love can be a rescue line. Leave a comment below. Tell us what part stayed with you. And if you believe that God places guardians in our lives exactly when we need them, hit the subscribe button and stay with us for the next story. May God bless you, guide you, and send loyal hearts into your path just when the night feels longest. Amen.